Life on the American frontier was fraught with challenges, dangers, and heart-wrenching stories that still echo through history. Among the most gripping are the tales of pioneer children who were abducted by Native American tribes and eventually made a startling choice: to remain with their captors rather than return to their birth families. These stories reveal complex relationships, cultural bonds, and the power of belonging that transcend the surface of these historical events. Join us as we explore the lives of 10 such children, uncovering the reasons behind their surprising decisions and the fascinating dynamics of frontier life. If you're captivated by untold tales from the Old West, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that bring history to life. Francis Slocum. In 1835, a trader named George Ewing encountered an elderly woman of the Miami tribe named Maconaquah. At the time, she was in her 60s, well regarded within her community, and had lived a fulfilling life as a widowed grandmother. Her late husband had served as a chief of the Miami, cementing her role as a respected figure. However, what truly surprised Ewing was a revelation that this esteemed elder had been born to white parents. Maconaquah's story unfolded, revealing her original name as Frances Slocum, the daughter of a Quaker family from Pennsylvania. Her life took a dramatic turn when, at the tender age of 5, she was taken by Seneca warriors. This event was not uncommon on the frontier, where interactions between indigenous peoples and settlers could be deeply complex. Shortly after her abduction, Frances was purchased by a Miami family in exchange for a few animal pelts. This family welcomed her as one of their own, raising her with the customs, language, and traditions of their people. In the years that followed, Frances fully embraced her new identity. She grew up among the Miami, married, and supported her husband as he rose to the position of chief. Together, they had 4 children, and Frances played an active role in raising them until they started families of their own. By the time George Ewing met her, 57 years had passed since her initial capture. She was no longer the young girl taken from her Quaker roots, but a proud and integral part of the Miami community. Frances's story became even more remarkable when it was discovered that her brothers had never stopped searching for her. Despite decades of uncertainty, her brother Isaac eventually located her. Their reunion, though poignant, was bittersweet. Frances no longer spoke English, having lived entirely within the cultural sphere of the Miami. Through an interpreter, she explained to Isaac why she chose to remain with the people who had become her family. "I do not wish to live any better or anywhere else," she told him. "I think the Great Spirit has permitted me to live so long because I have always lived with the Indians." Her words reflected the depth of her connection to the Miami and the life she had built among them. For Frances, returning to her Quaker roots would have meant leaving behind everything she had come to value, including the family, culture, and identity she had nurtured for over half a century. True to her convictions, Frances stayed with the Miami until her passing. She was laid to rest alongside the man she had loved and supported as her husband in the land that had become her home, Cynthia Ann Parker. Cynthia Ann Parker was just 9 years old in 1836 when she was taken by a group of Comanche warriors. This event occurred during a raid on her family's settlement in Texas, a time when such confrontations were common as settlers expanded westward into indigenous lands. During the raid, Cynthia and 4 other children were taken captive. It marked the beginning of a life-altering journey for Cynthia, who was separated from her family and her former way of life. Despite the traumatic circumstances of her capture, Cynthia managed to survive and adapt to her new environment. Over the next 4 years, she was fully assimilated into Comanche society. She embraced their culture, learning the language, participating in daily life, and forming bonds with her new family. Reports of her survival eventually reached traders and settlers. One trader, a man named Williams, learned of her presence in a Comanche camp and sought to negotiate her release. Williams offered the Comanche chief any sum of money in exchange for Cynthia's freedom, but when given the chance to speak to her, Cynthia remained silent, staring at the ground. Her reluctance to respond suggested that she had grown deeply attached to her new life and was unwilling to leave it behind. This moment marked the beginning of a decades-long effort to return Cynthia to her biological family, a process fraught with cultural misunderstandings and personal heartbreak. It wasn't until nearly 20 years later that Cynthia was forcibly removed from the Comanche. In 1860, during a confrontation between the Comanche and a group of Texas Rangers, Cynthia was discovered living among the tribe. Recognizing her white skin and blue eyes, the Rangers identified her as Cynthia Ann Parker and took her back to her biological relatives. However, what the Rangers saw as a rescue was, for Cynthia, a loss of everything she had come to hold dear. By this time, Cynthia had spent 24 years as part of the Comanche people. She had married Peta Nocona, a respected Comanche warrior, and together they had 3 children, including Quanah Parker, who would later become a prominent Comanche leader. The Rangers' actions not only removed Cynthia from her home, but also resulted in the death of her husband, further deepening her grief and sense of displacement. When Cynthia was returned to her family, she struggled to adjust. Living on her uncle's farm in Texas, she felt isolated and out of place. Her attempts to run away back to the Comanche were unsuccessful, and the limitations placed on her freedom weighed heavily on her. The deep cultural divide and her longing for the life she had known made her transition nearly impossible. Over time, Cynthia's grief and longing for her Comanche family took a toll on her physical and emotional well-being. She stopped eating and became increasingly frail. Weakened by malnutrition and eventually succumbing to illness, Cynthia passed away, leaving behind a story that continues to highlight the complexities of cultural identity, belonging, and the consequences of forced assimilation. Cynthia Ann Parker's life serves as a poignant reminder of the human cost of westward expansion and cultural conflict. Her story is a testament to the strength of identity and the bonds formed within adopted communities, even amid historical upheaval. Eunice Williams. Eunice Williams' story is one of transformation and adaptation. After being taken captive by Mohawk warriors, the young girl's life changed completely. Her father, Reverend John Williams, was determined to find her and bring her back to their Puritan community in Deerfield, Massachusetts. Despite his efforts, the Mohawks refused to allow him to buy her freedom. However, they permitted him to speak with her, offering a brief and poignant glimpse into the life she was beginning to lead. During their conversation, Eunice shared her fears and confusion about her new surroundings. She spoke of rituals performed by the Mohawks, interpreting them as mocking the devil, which reflected the lens of her Puritan upbringing. She also mentioned a French Catholic missionary who had begun teaching her prayers, expressing uncertainty about their meaning. "I don't understand one word of the prayers," she told her father. "I hope it won't do me any harm." Her words revealed a young girl caught between 2 worlds, struggling to make sense of the cultural and spiritual shifts she was experiencing. As years passed, Eunice's identity underwent a profound transformation. A decade after her capture, John Schuyler, an emissary, visited her on behalf of her father. By then, Eunice had fully embraced the Mohawk way of life. She had converted to Catholicism, a significant departure from her Puritan roots, and married a Mohawk warrior. She no longer spoke English and dressed in the traditional attire of her adopted people. Schuyler spent 2 hours attempting to persuade Eunice to return to her father and the community she had left behind. His efforts were met with a quiet but firm resistance. In the entire conversation, Eunice spoke only 4 words in response to his plea to reunite with her family. "It may not be." These words carried a sense of finality, reflecting her commitment to her new life and the bonds she had formed within the Mohawk community. Eunice's decision to remain with the Mohawks illustrates the complexities of cultural assimilation and personal agency. While her father and others viewed her as a captive, Eunice had forged a new identity and chosen to stay with the people who had become her family. Through Eunice's journey, we gain insight into the broader dynamics of colonial-era interactions between Native American tribes and settlers, as well as the personal struggles of individuals caught at the intersection of 2 vastly different worlds. Her life serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of cultural identity and the human capacity to adapt, even under the most challenging circumstances. Herman Layman. Herman Layman's life took a dramatic turn at the age of 10 when he was taken by Apache warriors. Over the years, this experience reshaped his identity so profoundly that he no longer saw himself as a white boy, but as an Apache through and through. By the time he was discovered 8 years later, Herman had completely assimilated into his adopted culture, even to the point of forgetting his original name. Within the Apache community, Herman, who called himself Enda, had earned respect as a skilled warrior. He rose to the rank of petty chief, a recognition of his bravery and leadership in battles. Herman had participated in numerous raids and skirmishes, including one audacious charge into a fort manned by Texas Rangers. These experiences solidified his identity as part of the Apache tribe, both in his mind and in the eyes of those around him. However, a tragic event disrupted his life within the tribe. A conflict arose when a medicine man killed Herman's adoptive father, Carnovista, an Apache warrior who had mentored and cared for him. Seeking justice, Herman avenged Carnovista's death by killing the medicine man. This act, while aligning with the warrior ethos of retribution, left him in a precarious position. Fearing retaliation, he fled into the wilderness, choosing solitude over the potential dangers of staying with the Apaches or returning to white society. For a year, Herman lived in isolation, a testament to his resilience and adaptability. He avoided both the Apache and settlers, navigating the rugged terrain and relying on his skills to survive. Eventually, he sought refuge on a Native American reservation, where his life took another unexpected turn. News of a blue-eyed, fair-skinned boy living on the reservation reached Herman's biological family, sparking hope in his mother. She traveled to the reservation, clinging to the possibility that this might be her long-lost son. When they finally met, neither recognized the other. Herman's demeanor was wary and distant. Reflecting on this later, he said, "I was an Indian, and I did not like them because they were palefaces." It was Herman's sister who bridged the gap. She noticed a distinctive scar, a mark only her brother could have, and joyfully cried out, "It's Herman!" Her exclamation stirred something deep within him. The name sounded vaguely familiar, as if from a distant memory. Herman later recalled the moment, describing the confusion he felt before the realization dawned. It was his own name. Herman Layman's story highlights the profound effects of cultural assimilation and the struggle for identity in a life shaped by two vastly different worlds. Through Herman's journey, we gain a deeper appreciation of the complexities of life on the frontier and the intersections of native and settler experiences. Olive Ann Oatman. When Olive Oatman recounted her time as a captive of the Mojave, she described them in harsh terms, portraying them as uncivilized and her experience as one of great suffering. However, certain aspects of her story suggest a more nuanced reality, one that Olive may not have fully acknowledged or was reluctant to share. Perhaps the most striking evidence was visible to anyone who looked at her: the intricate blue tattoo etched across her jaw, a symbol of her time with the Mojave. Olive was raised in a devout Mormon family that set out on a journey to California, seeking a new life. Along the way, tragedy struck when Apaches attacked their wagon train, killing most of her family. Olive and her sister were taken captive, but not for long. The Apaches sold them to the Mojave, a tribe that would adopt Olive into their community. For the next 5 years, she lived among them, not as a captive in the traditional sense, but as a member of their society. The Mojave treated Olive and her sister with kindness, offering them food, clothing, and shelter. The tattoo on Olive's face, a traditional Mojave marking, was likely meant to symbolize her integration into their community. Far from being forced, the tattoo may have been part of a cultural ritual, one that Olive accepted as part of her new life. Such markings were often a sign of belonging and protection, ensuring safe passage into the afterlife. When Olive's brother Lorenzo, the sole survivor of their family, tracked her down, the circumstances of her return were complex. The Mojave were enduring a period of severe famine, and their resources were strained. Concerned for Olive's well-being, her adoptive family reluctantly agreed to let her leave and reunite with her brother. After her return to white society, Olive published a book detailing her experiences. In it, she criticized the Mojave, portraying them in a negative light. Yet her actions and appearance told a different story. Olive had fully adopted their way of life, wearing their clothes and embracing their customs. The tattoo, which she could not hide, was a permanent reminder of her years with the tribe and a testament to her integration into their culture. One controversial detail adds another layer of complexity to Olive's story. Among the Mojave, she was known by the name Spansa, a term that has been interpreted to mean sore vagina. While its exact significance is debated, It has fueled speculation about her experiences during her time with the tribe. Olive insisted in her writings that she was treated with respect and that her chastity remained intact. The truth behind this name, however, remains a mystery, leaving room for varying interpretations. Olive Oatman's life was shaped by profound cultural shifts and conflicting identities. Her experiences among the Mojave likely influenced her more deeply than she admitted. Her story reminds us of the complexities of cultural assimilation and the challenges of reconciling one's past with a return to a very different world. Mary Campbell. Mary Campbell's name is one of many in the tragic history of children taken during Pontiac's War. Like hundreds of others, she was torn from her home and her parents forced to live among Native American tribes as a part of a bitter cycle of revenge. The children, including Mary, were meant to replace those lost by the tribes during the conflict, an exchange of sorts as the Native people sought retribution for the deaths of their own. When the war finally ended, Colonel Henry Bouquet took a decisive step to restore peace. He compiled a list of more than 200 children who had been taken during the conflict, then confronted Pontiac's warriors. He demanded that they return each child, threatening that peace would remain elusive unless they complied. The tribes reluctantly agreed, and the children were sent back to their families. However, Mary Campbell's return was anything but peaceful. She resisted going back to her biological family, despite being forcibly taken from the Lenape tribe who had raised her. Once she was back with her original family, she tried repeatedly to escape and return to the people who had become her family during the years of captivity. This wasn't an isolated case. Many children felt the same way. Of the 200 children who were returned, nearly half attempted to flee from their biological families. They had grown so attached to their Native American captors, who had cared for them, that they preferred the life they had built with them over the one they had left behind. This raises an intriguing question about identity, belonging, and the complex bonds that form between these children and the Native families that took them in. Mary Campbell's story is not just one of captivity and conflict, but a poignant reflection on the impact of cultural integration. The children who had been taken were often torn between two worlds, the one they had been born into and the one they had come to know. Mary Jemson. Mary Jemson's experience as a captive is one of the most harrowing stories from early American history. At the tender age of 13, she was thrust into a brutal situation that would shape the rest of her life. The Iroquois raiding party that captured her family inflicted unspeakable horrors upon them, and yet in the end, Mary chose to remain with her captors, developing a deep bond with them that would last until her death. Mary was just a teenager when the Iroquois Confederacy launched a raid on her home. The Jemson family, taken from their lives in a terrifying surprise attack, were forced to endure grueling conditions as they marched through the wilderness. A warrior kept them moving with a whip, punishing them if they lagged behind, and the captives were given no food. When they grew thirsty, they were made to drink urine instead of water, a chilling reflection of their captors' complete dominance. As if the journey itself wasn't cruel enough, Mary's ordeal intensified when, after being separated from her family, she learned of her parents' fate. That night, around a campfire, she saw a warrior remove her mother and father's scalps from a bag, cleaning and drying them over the flames. The image of her parents' scalps would stay with her forever, a haunting memory that colored her entire life. Despite the trauma of this experience, something unexpected happened. Mary, as she grew older, would recount the story of her captivity in a detached, almost nostalgic tone, as though it were the stuff of thrilling adventure. She had been taken by the Seneca, a tribe within the Iroquois Confederacy, and she became fully integrated into their way of life. She married a Delaware man, embraced the tribe's customs, and lived with them as though she had never known any other life. Mary's attachment to her new family was so profound that she chose to stay with them, even after the passage of time allowed her the opportunity to leave. Her deep connection to the Seneca people and her new family appears to have superseded the loss of her biological family. The reasons for her steadfast attachment are complex and may have been driven by the bonds of survival, the care of the Seneca, and the undeniable influence of the environment in which she had grown up. Her story, while filled with hardship and loss, is also a testament to the adaptability of the human spirit. Mary Jemison's decision to stay with her captors highlights the complicated nature of captivity, identity, and belonging. Her life among the Seneca was, for her, a new reality, a place where she found love, safety, and perhaps a sense of peace that she never could have imagined when she was first torn from her family, the Boyd children. The Boyd children's story is one of stark contrast between the expectations of family reunification and the harsh realities of captivity. After years spent living with various Iroquois and Delaware families, they were finally freed by their father, John Boyd. Yet instead of welcoming him with gratitude, the children chose to flee the moment they were returned to his care, running away to rejoin the people who had originally taken them. This response was perplexing to their father, who had gone to great lengths to secure their freedom, only to have them reject his efforts. The Boyd children had been captured during an Iroquois raid and sold off to different tribes. Their capture was a traumatic event, one that began with the forced march through the wilderness, where they were forced to watch the brutal death of their mother. She had been beaten to death by the warriors for failing to keep pace, a horrific act that left the children emotionally scarred. Her body was abandoned, and the children were thrust into captivity, where their lives would become a long struggle between two worlds. It took their father, John Boyd, 4 years to track down and rescue his children. The first to be rescued was his eldest son, David. However, the reunion was not the joyous occasion John had hoped for. David expressed no desire to return home, insisting that he wanted to stay with the Delaware family who had raised him. Despite his father's pleas, David eventually sneaked away in the night, returning to the tribe that had taken him years before. This pattern of rejection continued as John Boyd moved from tribe to tribe, negotiating for the release of each of his children. Despite his success in bringing them back, nearly every child chose to leave again, vanishing into the night to return to their captors. Over time, John Boyd's determination was tested to its limits. He freed each of his children, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not compel them to stay with him. Their attachment to the tribes and families that had taken them seemed to outweigh the bonds of blood and home. The Boyd children's responses speak volumes about the complexity of captivity and assimilation. For years, they had lived among the Iroquois in Delaware, becoming part of these communities, adopting their ways of life, and forming relationships that felt more natural to them than their original family. The trauma of their capture was profound, but so too was the sense of belonging they found with their captors. By the time they were freed, they had grown to see their captors as family, and their former lives seemed foreign and distant. John Boyd's experience reflects a painful reality for many families, torn apart by captivity during this period. The children, despite their natural connection to their biological family, were shaped by their years spent among the native tribes. Their emotional attachment to their captors was so strong that they could not imagine life in a world that felt like strangers to them. Boyd's inability to keep his children illustrates the deep cultural divides and the complicated nature of identity when one is forcibly removed from their home and raised in a completely different environment. This story is not just one of captivity and rescue, but also one of the lasting effects of displacement, of how children, when removed from their biological families, can form new attachments and identities that surpass those they were born into. Adolf Korn. Adolf Korn's story is a poignant tale of identity, captivity, and the profound impact that forced displacement can have on an individual. When he was freed from his Comanche captors, his parents, fearing for his future, moved him far from the tribe that had taken him in. Unlike many other children who had been captured, Korn had no means to return to the people who had raised him. And so, rather than reuniting with his biological family, he fled into the wilderness, choosing a life of isolation in a cave. Korn had been captured at just 10 years old and was sold to a childless Comanche woman. She took him in as her own, and though he initially grieved the loss of his biological family, he soon began to adjust to his new life. Growing up on the frontier, Korn had struggled to connect with his parents, who were often preoccupied with the demands of daily life. In contrast, his Comanche mother devoted all her attention to him, making him feel valued in ways he hadn't experienced before. Over time, he came to love her and the life they shared. 3 years after his capture, Korn's parents were able to bring him back, but his time with the Comanche had fundamentally changed him. Despite being restored to his biological family, he never truly felt at home among them. His heart remained with the Comanche, and he began to express his alienation by raiding nearby farms and stealing cattle. His actions led to a growing record of legal troubles, and in a desperate attempt to prevent him from spiraling further, his parents relocated to a remote ranch, hoping distance would help. However, Korn's disconnection from his new life only deepened. He could not reconcile the person he had become with the life his parents expected him to lead. Rather than try to reintegrate into the white society his parents sought for him, he chose to live in solitude, retreating to a cave where he spent the remainder of his days. For Korn, this cave became a sanctuary where he could remain true to the identity that had formed during his years with the Comanche, away from the pressures to conform to a world that felt foreign and disconnected from the life he had once known. In his solitude, Korn seemed to hold vigil for the Comanche family he had left behind. His decision to withdraw from society speaks to the deep emotional and psychological effects of being forcibly removed from one's community and culture. Korn's story highlights the struggles of cultural identity and belonging, especially for those who were captured as children and grew to view their captors as family. He could never fully return to the life of his birth, nor could he fully integrate into the world his parents envisioned for him. For the rest of his life, Korn lived in quiet reverence for the people he had come to regard as his true family, the Comanche, and he never stopped longing for a reunion with the brothers he had lost. Theodore Bab. At just 14 years old, Theodore Bab was resolute in his hatred for the Comanche tribe that had taken him captive. His life had been shattered when they killed his mother and dragged him and his younger sister Bianca into a life of captivity. Though they could take his life if they wished, Theodore made a vow to himself that he would never willingly accept life among his captors. In the days that followed, Theodore endured severe punishment for his defiance. His captors relentlessly beat him, yet he refused to show any sign of weakness. He did not cry or flinch, even when they struck him mercilessly. His resistance became a test of his will, and though he was young, his determination to maintain his dignity in the face of brutal treatment set him apart. Eventually, driven by desperation, Theodore attempted to escape. However, he didn't get far before the Comanche recaptured him. Instead of receiving mercy, he was dragged back and subjected to an even more brutal beating. Despite the pain, Theodore remained unyielding. His unwavering resolve angered his captors, who grew frustrated with his stubbornness. In a final attempt to break his spirit, they tied him to a tree and began preparing to burn him alive, placing grass and branches at his feet. Amidst this terrifying ordeal, Theodore's younger sister Bianca cried out for her brother's life. Yet even in the face of such a gruesome fate, Theodore maintained a steadfast composure. He did not flinch or show fear. His eyes locked with those of the warriors who stood poised to kill him, and he silently challenged them to carry through with their threat. Astonishingly, the Comanche hesitated. They saw in this young boy a courage and resilience they had not expected. Rather than kill him, they decided to spare his life, recognizing his bravery. This pivotal moment marked a dramatic shift in Theodore's life. Rather than remaining a captive to be exploited, he was taken under the wing of the tribe. The Comanche began to train him, shaping him into a warrior. They taught him the ways of the tribe, how to ride, how to fight, and how to carry out raids. In a matter of months, Theodore adapted to his new life. Though he had once resisted their influence with all his might, he began to tap into a strength and a sense of purpose that he had never known before. Within just 6 months, Theodore had fully integrated into the Comanche way of life. His transformation was so profound that when his father attempted to buy his freedom, the Comanche chief believed Theodore would never return to his former life. The young boy had become so deeply connected to the tribe that the idea of returning to his old life seemed unimaginable. In the end, Theodore did return to his family, but he was no longer the same boy who had been taken by the Comanche. He had undergone a complete metamorphosis. He was now a skilled Comanche warrior, having participated in multiple raids against white settlers' farms. His time with the tribe had changed him irrevocably, and he had embraced a new identity, one that blended his past with the brutal realities of his captivity. His story reflects the psychological and emotional toll that captivity can take, as well as the resilience of the human spirit in the face of extreme hardship. Though his journey was shaped by violence and loss, Theodore's ability to adapt and survive speaks to the transformative power of experience and the human capacity for reinvention. The stories of these brave pioneer children who forged new lives among Native American tribes are powerful testaments to resilience, adaptability, and the complexity of cultural exchanges during the westward expansion. Their journeys reflect the untold chapters of American history, filled with both heartache and unexpected kinship. If you found these tales as gripping as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating historical insights. Join us as we uncover more untold stories from the Old West that you won't want to miss.